Travel back in time with me for a moment and imagine this. The year is 1978 and you've just gotten back to your house. As you drift off to sleep, you start to hear your doorknob rattle. You're frightened, so you open your eyes, only to see a dark figure leaning over your head with a log in hand. This is the last thing that you'll ever see. Though it may sound like a fictional story to you, it could eventually become a reality. All it takes is to be in the wrong place at the wrong time to fall prey to a serial killer. But the question is, what makes a serial killer so different from you or from me? Is it in his or her DNA, or is it a byproduct of their upbringing? In actuality, the answer is both, nature and nurture. In this speech, I hope to inform you of these two forces and how they make serial killers come about. First, I will discuss the force of nature, specifically the MAOA or serial killer gene. Next, I will discuss the force of nurture, or how a person's upbringing can mold them into who they become. Finally, I will briefly review the life of Ted Bundy and how nature and nurture combine to make him a serial killer. I'm sure that we've all heard some general things about serial killers and DNA, whether it be fact or fiction. But whether we like it or not, a large portion of who we are is actually written into our DNA. In a 2015 article for the Jackson Laboratory Research Organization, Dolores Garcia Arocena said that the DNA actually was linked to more aggressive tendencies. This DNA link was found in the MAOA gene, and people who had low levels of this MAOA gene actually showed more aggressive tendencies and were more likely to become a serial killer. This finding has been proven in many studies, one being in a 2014 study published in the Molecular Psychiatry Journal. In this study, with almost all controlled variables, over 700 prisoners were observed via survey and via blood sample. In all of these findings, the genetic link between low MAOA levels as well as aggressive tendencies was confirmed. In order to better understand what MAOA exactly is and what these findings entitle, picture MAOA as soup for this next scenario. Imagine a hungry man getting a full bowl of soup. He's probably really happy. But the next day, he gets one drop of soup. He's probably angry and more likely to lash out. This is exactly like MAOA. Low levels, more aggression. Genetics can certainly lead a person to be a serial killer, as seen by the MAOA gene. But are there other influences? The answer is yes. Secondly, I will describe the influence of nurture on a person becoming a serial killer. In a 2020 article from Penn State University researchers, it was emphasized that nature alone is not enough to send a person over the edge. In actuality, predispositions with combined experiences make a person a serial killer. For example, if a person has low MAOA levels, but they have a happy and healthy childhood upbringing, they're most likely not going to become a serial killer. However, the same cannot be true for a person with unhealthy childhood experiences. Such nurturing experiences were described in a 2018 article by PhD Nicola Davies in Psychiatry Advisor. Such experiences include neglect, psychological abuse, beatings, amongst others. Essentially, a person's upbringing has a huge influence on who they become and can combine with their genetics. As seen by this, serial killers form because of more than one reason, and we know this is true for most things. But how do these two forces of nature and nurture actually play out? To make my final point, we will observe the life of Ted Bundy briefly to see how nature and nurture combine to make him a serial killer. I'm sure that most of you have seen the Ted Bundy movie with Zac Efron, but in case you don't know, he is a commonly known serial killer and committed many crimes, including Florida State University killings in 1978, in circumstances that I had to imagine a few minutes ago. But this was not because of nature or nurture alone, but rather a combination. Researchers from the University of California and the UC Merced Undergraduate Research Journal found that Ted Bundy actually did have low levels of MAOA in his DNA, meaning he was more aggressive. Additionally, his childhood was not the greatest. He was born in a, quote, house for unwed mothers, end quote, according to this journal, and he thought that his mom was his sister growing up. When he found that she was actually his mom and was unwed, it shattered his world. He felt untrustworthiness, and it led him to a life of crime. As seen by these findings, it was a combination of nature and nurture that led Ted Bundy to be a serial killer. And the same is true for most others. As I close, I hope that I've shed some more light on a not great aspect of humanity. First, I reviewed the force of nature and how a person's DNA can predispose them to be a serial killer, specifically with low levels of MAOA. Next, I discussed the forces of nurture and how a person can be more predisposed to be a serial killer because of their upbringing. And lastly, I reviewed how Ted Bundy was shaped to be a serial killer through his nature and his nurture. It is evident that Ted Bundy and other serial killers are extremely wicked, shockingly evil, and vile because of their upbringing and their DNA. Thank you for listening.